I'm reading from Daniel chapter 2, and I will begin with verse 27. Daniel chapter 2, verse 27. Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, "The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter? And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, forasmuch as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things. And as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Forasmuch as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. Daniel chapter 2, we find Daniel speaking to one of the most powerful individuals who ever held sway in this world. Daniel would serve before 4 different potentates through the time of the Babylonian exile of the Jewish people. There would be, first of all, King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the one who came to Jerusalem and under God's direction, although Nebuchadnezzar would think otherwise, under God's direction, he conquered and destroyed Jerusalem and carried away the southern kingdom into exile. Then there would be Daniel serving under Belshazzar. You remember Belshazzar, the man who held that wild feast and on whom the wall of the banquet hall was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Belshazzar, you've been weighed, you've been found as heavy as a feather, and your kingdom has been divided. And Belshazzar was no more that very night. Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, then Darius. It was during Darius's time, you remember, that Daniel, now becoming an elderly man, we suspect, that Daniel was thrown into the lion's den because he resolutely continued to honor the God of heaven and to open his windows, and 3 times a day, even though the edict was plain as day that the people were to pray to no other God except to Darius, Daniel, he continued to pray to the God of heaven. And then finally, Cyrus. Cyrus would be the man who would release the Jews in order that they might start to return back to Jerusalem and to Judea. Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius, and Cyrus. Here we are, early on in this unfolding. And of course, thereafter, after Cyrus, there would arise the Greeks and there would arise the Roman Empire of tremendous jurisdiction and strength and terror. But here we are early on in the exile of the Jews. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And how reminiscent this is of the life of Joseph, and Joseph as he stood before Pharaoh in order to interpret his dream, which no one else, to the best of their ability, could come up with anything that made sense, anything that was convincing at all. Nebuchadnezzar, we must remember, had ultimate power. What he said went. Most certainly he had counselors and he had advisors and he had all kinds of courtiers round about him. But Nebuchadnezzar, he was all powerful. And he had a dream one night. We read early in Daniel chapter 2. And he gets up in the morning and he wants to know what it means. But he knows that there is the danger of conniving, of trickery, of all kinds of shenanigans going on in order to dupe the king. And so he says to all of those magicians and all of the Chaldeans who come before him, I've had a dream and I want you to give me the interpretation. And they say, no problem. Tell us the dream and we'll come up with something that will satisfy you. Nebuchadnezzar says to them, I want you to know that I'm absolutely determined in this matter, that you are going to tell me exactly what my dream meant. And they say, "Sure, let's have it. Tell us the dream, and we will most certainly do what the king has asked of us." And the king says to them, "I want to know not just that you can come up with an interpretation, but I want to know that you are able to actually tell me what the dream itself was. If you can tell the one, then you can most assuredly be trusted in order to give the interpretation of the other." At which all of these men turn white as snow, and they say, O king, you cannot do this. You cannot ask such a thing of us. Never has such a request been made." And they say, "It cannot be done. It can't be done. It is an impossible request." And the king, he orders that they be slain. He orders that all of these guys be gathered up and that they be put to death. Daniel is also gathered up along with them. Daniel was not there at the first request of the king, but when he is sought out and when he is brought into the understanding of what the king has asked, he asks for time. For he knows that there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, that there is a God far beyond the gods of Babylon and far beyond the gods of Nebuchadnezzar, far beyond the gods of all the Chaldeans and all of their trickery, far beyond anything that this world has to offer. Daniel has this confidence: there is a God in heaven, and this God is a God who revealeth secrets, and he maketh things known that is known in no other way. Daniel prays, and he calls upon God in order that it might be revealed, and it is revealed to him. He speaks to Arioch, and Arioch is a key right-hand man of King Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel is brought in haste, we read, verse 25. Arioch says, "I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation." And Nebuchadnezzar, he says to Daniel, "Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen?" First of all, that incredible request. Art thou able to make known unto me the dream itself which I have seen? And secondly, then, the interpretation thereof. And with that we began our reading. Daniel answered in the presence of the king, "The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king." It's beyond them. It's far beyond their ability in order to comprehend such things. There needs to be a vivid, living relationship with the God of heaven, of which these men know nothing. Those guys, wise as they might be in some of the things of this world, all of them, they cannot do what you have asked. But there is a unique God in heaven that maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. And Daniel says, "Both the dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these." And Daniel then, he lays out very clearly exactly both what the dream itself was, as well as then, verse 36, "And we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king." It's a great statue but it is of mixed elements. There are various components which have come together in order to craft and to form this. And Daniel, he says the interpretation is that there are 4 different kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar, I'm sure, was ever so delighted to hear that he was the kingdom of gold, that he was the first, and that subsequently the other kingdoms, that they were of lesser value. However, the strength of the kingdom would be of increasing strength. Even though that would go from gold to silver, yet the strength would increase as the value of the element would decrease. We read in Daniel chapter 3 how that Nebuchadnezzar, sometime later, made an image of gold. The whole thing was gold. Its height was 60 cubits, 60 cubits, 90 feet high approximately, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits, 9 feet wide, and it was set up on the plain of Dura. And Nebuchadnezzar, he says to all of the leadership, the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces, he tells these fellows to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had set up. And the word is this. I'm sure that Nebuchadnezzar, having heard of Daniel's vision, how delighted he was that he was that head of gold. But why not all of it be gold? And why not he have all of the exaltation? Nebuchadnezzar, he tells all these people at the dedication of his marvelous statue, which I'm sure glistened and was blinding as the sun would come up and sparkle on it, shine upon it. He tells the people, now, when you hear the orchestra, there's a whole lot of instruments listed here, but let's just call them the orchestra. When you hear the band sound the music, whoso falleth not down and worship shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So we have it that there are 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refused to fall down and to worship Nebuchadnezzar's image of gold. They were given a second chance. They were given an opportunity to have it explained to them, and the king says, do you fellows really grab a hold of this? I think that there is something wrong with your heads, that you didn't grab a hold of what was being said and what the dangers were in this situation. And they respond to the king, King, we understand what the dangers are perfectly well. We understand who you are, and we understand what our position is in this. However, we are not going to serve your gods, and we are going to do everything that we can to stand true. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not worship thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. For many years now, it's been told to us all, I've heard it just as well as you have, that diversity is a good thing, that in the composition of our culture, that diversity is a strength. And I'm prepared to acknowledge that and to agree with that to a certain level. However, very suddenly, the thinking and the proclamation of our culture has seen a rapid twist where we are being compelled, we are being demanded that we fall down before our culture and that we all agree, that we all think the same, and that we bow before the gods of this world. Daniel chapter 3 resonates to us so powerfully about what took place then, that there was no options to disobey except to suffer the consequences. And so, in the strangest way, as we come to celebrate Canada Day once again in just a few days' time, we see that the heart of our nation has been twisted and contorted, and so that we are expected to fall down before the gods that are worshipped in this world, and that to have any other opinion, to have any other thoughts on the matter is absolutely repugnant and unacceptable. King Nebuchadnezzar, it tells us, was full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed. I just see this in my mind's eye. This fellow who was so powerful, all of a sudden, when they said no, he went into a fit of fury. And his facial image, his face was contorted, even as his heart was contorted. And he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. So it is in our world, the rage at anyone who adheres to the God of the Bible as being the one and only who is to be attended to and listened to and worshiped and obeyed. But in chapter 2, verse 44, Daniel had already stood before this very king and said to him, in the days of these kings, this world has seen so many different kings and kingdoms. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. In the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel exalted Nebuchadnezzar, but he also reminded him of his humanity, that he was a passing figure on the world scene, that his kingdom, though as glorious as it might be, yet it would fade away, and another would take its place, and then another, all of them to be destroyed. But Nebuchadnezzar, you need to understand that the God of heaven, and he had already said back at the opening of his exposition of what was going on, he said, there is a God in heaven, and he is the one who revealeth what is taking place in this world. And Daniel now says, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. And it won't be like the kingdom of gold which you rule over, or the kingdom of silver which shall come thereafter, or the bronze, or the iron, the clay. It shall be a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all of these successive kingdoms and all of the other kingdoms of the world. It shall come and it shall go, but this kingdom shall stand forever. The interpretation, as we consider the wider scope of the Scriptures, is perfectly unmistakable that there is only one kingdom of which Daniel could possibly be speaking. The Greeks, they came and went. Alexander the Great, having fought innumerable battles, when he had conquered the last enemy that he had thought was round about him, we are told that he sat down and wept like a little child because there were no more battles to fight. And very quickly he was dead. The Romans, they distinguished themselves in many different ways, and parts of their empire did last for hundreds of years, but they were gone. Much more recently, there have been various empires which have risen, kingdoms which have distinguished themselves, all having passed away. We see kingdoms rising in our own day and exercising their authority. But even in the exercise of their authority, the handwriting is on the wall. But Daniel, he tells us, in the midst of these very times, in the midst of these kingdoms, the God of heaven will be establishing a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and it shall stand forever. So much of what we do in our world is of such temporary nature. We paint a house, and that house needs to be painted once again. We change the carpet, and the carpet soon needs to be changed again. We do the dishes, and very soon the dishes need to be done again. But God, He works things differently. Even as we read out of Isaiah chapter 55, that God, He works differently, and His values and His priorities and the course of what takes place from His hand, so very different. Why do we fight? Why do we kick? Why do we resist? And why does this world not submit to Him? In verse 46, we read of Nebuchadnezzar's temporary response. Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel. Can you imagine this? The potentate Nebuchadnezzar, he gets off of his throne, having struck such terror into the hearts of the Chaldeans, those soothsayers and magicians and all of those guys. Nebuchadnezzar, he gets up off of his throne and he falls down in front of Daniel, and he commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors, incense that is, unto him. And the king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth, it is that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, and seeing thou couldest reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man. Why do we not attend to him, to the God of gods and the Lord of lords? Why do we not bow before him and surrender our lives to him as we ought to? Oh, let your heart be tender, not as Nebuchadnezzar's, which was quickly hardened again, but come before the Lord and seek his favor and surrender your very life to him. Lord, we give you thanks and praise for your word. We give you thanks of what we read here in chapter 2 and chapter 3 and elsewhere in Daniel's prophecy of your greatness and of your goodness. Truly, you are a God of gods. You are the King over all lords, and you are establishing a kingdom which shall never end. O Lord, may that kingdom be extended this very day. May there be many who come to the cross of Jesus Christ and seeing the love and the eternal work which was done there, may there be a glad, wholehearted, repentant, and surrender of a life to you. So, Lord, work in power, and for all of us, may we catch a glimpse once again of your grandeur, of your greatness, that you are able to do that which utterly stumps the best minds of this world. So may we follow hard after you and exalt you each and every moment of each and every day, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.